there, Buttercups. Your resident T-Bell here. Welcome to Hark, 'tis the T-Bill. Let's dive in for that tea today, huh? Before Lizzie Bennet was roasting society, Jane Austen was studying it like a battlefield map. And even before Elizabeth Bennet was a figment in her imagination, there was Jane. She entered the world on December 16th, 1775, in Steventon Rectory, Hampshire, smack in the middle of Georgian England. This was a society obsessed with rank, inheritance, and strategic marriage. This wasn't your soft-focused Regency fantasy of tea and piano sonatas. It was an economic system in silk gloves. Okay. Now, she was born the seventh child of 8 to Reverend George Austen and Cassandra Lee Austen. So she grew up in a very bustling household, but it was also very intellectually alive, and books were abundant. Conversation was sharp, and wit was practically a survivor skill. Okay? If that doesn't sound familiar already, you've never either read the book or seen the movies. Just saying. Now, her father was a clergyman, and he had unusually progressive commitments to the education of his children. And he gave Jane unrestricted access to his library. Now, y'all, this was a huge, enormous privilege for a girl in the 18th century, okay? Now, her mother was socially savvy, witty, and connected. So together, they raised their children in an environment of reading, amateur theatrical satire, and observation. And then there was Cassandra, Jane's older sister, confidant, editor, emotional anchor, and lifelong ride or die. Now, why does this matter? Jane Austen was not an outsider critiquing society from afar. She was raised inside the exact machine that she would later dissect. She knew the rules of class, gender, and money because she had to live in it. Before Austen wrote about marriage plots, she understood marriage was often an economic negotiation disguised as romance. And in all honesty, was there really romance involved in a good portion of them? Just wondering. Now, long before Pride and Prejudice, Austen was already writing with the energy of someone side-eyeing societal nonsense from the corner of the room. I don't know, I'm starting to think maybe like Penelope Featherington vibes, but she was pre-Penelope Featherington. Just saying. As a teenager, Jane created what we now call her Juvenia. Essentially, her wild, hilarious, chaotic short stories, plays, and parodies written primarily to entertain her family. These weren't exactly polite beginner exercises. They were absurd, rebellious, and often delightfully unhinged. Okay, so her stories mocked melodrama, performative femininity, sentimental fiction, and social hypocrisy. So, I'm telling you, the more we read and we learn about Jane Austen, it's so evident in what she writes that she's what she knows, right? So in works like Love and Friendship, and she misspelled friendship intentionally. She gleefully exaggerated the dramatic conventions of popular novels, exposing how ridiculous they could be. So in translation, teenage Jane Austen was already dragging society's fake emotional theatrics. She did not care. Now, what she developed early was irony, satire, character dissection, and the art of exposing absurdity through politeness. And this is where she sharpened the blade she'd later use in her adult novels. Even as a teenager, Austen's writing said, "Oh, you people are serious? Fascinating." But to understand her genius, you have to understand one brutal truth. For women in Georgian England, marriage was less often about love than financial survival, okay? Inheritance laws like entailment frequently prevented women from inheriting family property, meaning daughters could be left economically stranded unless they married well. Does that sound familiar? Sure should, because Pride and Prejudice literally opens under this pressure. Now, when Austen's family moved from Steventon to Bath in 1801 and then later to Southampton after her father's death, Jane experienced firsthand the instability women faced when money and property were controlled by men. So she herself never married. Now, she did accept a proposal from Harris Bigwither in 1802 and then rejected him the next day. That decision likely cost her financial security, but it did preserve her and everything she was about. Then there's Tom Lefroy. A possible flirtation, probable emotional significance, endless literary gossip. Now, this matters because Austen knew that love was personal, marriage was political. And this is precisely why her novels treat courtship like social chess. Every flirtation carries stakes, money, status, survival, reputation. Austen didn't just write will they, won't they. She wrote what does this union cost? And that was impeccable and very, very innovative for her time. Now let's get on to her writing career, okay? So between 1796 and 1797, she drafted her first impressions, or the novel that would later become Pride and Prejudice. And honestly, such an iconic title because Austen's fiction is obsessed with how people misjudge each other. Now, let's look at the major evolution of her other novels. So, Eleanor and Mariana became Sense and Sensibility. We talked about First Impressions. Susan became Northanger Abbey, and then came publication. So, in 1811, she published Sense and Sensibility by a Lady, and we'll get into that, I promise. 1813 was Pride and Prejudice, 1814 Mansfield Park, and 1815 Emma. So, Austen's secret weapon was free and direct discourse. So this technique changed fiction. See, Austen blended third-person narration with the inner consciousness of her characters, especially Elizabeth Bennet, which we will get to know deeply. And that allowed readers to experience both the character's thoughts and the irony of those thoughts. Okay, so in plain terms, she's going to let you live inside a character's assumptions while quietly revealing how wrong they might be. Why is this revolutionary? Because Austen turned interior thought into satire. She didn't just tell stories. She exposed bias, ego, projection, and social absurdity from the inside out. Translation, Jane Austen invented the literary equivalent of girl, be serious. Now remember how she published Sense and Sensibility by a Lady? Well, Austen's novels were published anonymously during her lifetime. Now, this isn't because she lacked ambition, far from it, because female authorship came with a risk. Women writers were often trivialized, criticized, or morally judged, but by publishing by a lady, preserved respectability while obscuring identity. Now, the irony of this was that society was willing to consume her brilliance so long as it wasn't too visibly female. Yeah, tell me how that works. But her family knew, the public mostly didn't. Jane Austen had to disguise her genius to get society to read it, and yet that changed the novel forever, you know what I mean? And honestly, that's crazy to me that if you look nowadays, we don't have to question it, and I love that. And Jane Austen was one of those people who still demanded attention even when it was published by a lady. Now, later in life, she moved, specifically in 1809, she moved to Chawton Cottage, and that's the place where her career truly flourished. Now, this is where she revised earlier manuscripts and produced some of her greatest work. Chawton became her creative headquarters, her literary command center, if you will. But by 1816, her health was beginning to decline. Now, the exact cause remains debated. It could have been Addison's disease, Hodgkin's lymphoma, tuberculosis. There's no confirmation available. What matters is this, though. Even while she was ill, she kept writing. She completed Persuasion and began Sanditon. Here's the thing. Her body may have been failing, but her mind really was not. Jane Austen died on July 18, 1817, in Winchester at just 41 years old. She was buried in Winchester Cathedral, and her obituary praised her character and religion. It barely mentioned her writing, which feels almost offensively ironic, but given that she published by a lady anonymously, it makes sense. Now, only later did her brother Henry publicly identify her as the author behind the novels. And from there, Jane Austen earned her immortality. Now, why does she still dominate? Austen didn't just write romance. You know what I mean? She exposed gender economics, critiqued class performance, pioneered psychological realism. She reshaped narrative voice, influenced feminist criticisms, and inspired Clueless adaptations, retellings, and academic obsession. So picture from Clueless to Bridget Jones's Diary. Austen's DNA is everywhere. Jane Austen looked at polite society, smiled sweetly, and then documented its entire power structure. And I feel like a part of me, as a writer myself, does actually go back to Jane Austen myself. Now, I've read Pride and Prejudice. I've seen the two movies. I very much adore the way that she's done everything. And if I'm being very honest, Buttercups, I am a Darcy fanatic, okay? I'm just saying. Now, Darcy as a fictional character, phenomenal. When we get to Colin Firth's version of Darcy, oh yeah. And even Matthew McFadden does a phenomenal job. But Darcy is so well written that even the fictional version of him stops me in my tracks. Alright, so let's pour some of that bonus tea. Maybe some lesser known Austen lore. She loved to gossip, loved to dance, play card games, and, satire. Cassandra, her sister, burned many of her letters after her death, and that likely destroyed some of her sharpest commentary, which means we may never know the full extent of her, private opinions. Her house in Chawton remains a literary pilgrimage site. She was never just a romance writer. She was a strategist of social observation, a title I think worthy of her. Jane Austen, a parson's daughter, social analyst, anonymous revolutionary, and literary assassin in a bonnet. She didn't merely give us love stories, she gave us a blueprint for understanding power, performance, and survival in a world determined to reduce women to merely marriage prospects. Alright, so Pride and Prejudice isn't just about love, obviously. It's about survival in satin gloves. It's a full-blown social chess match, okay? At first glance, Pride and Prejudice looks like a love story. Girl meets rich, emotionally constipated man, chaos ensues. But Pride and Prejudice is doing something much sharper. Jane Austen didn't just write romance. She dissected society with the precision of someone smiling politely while dragging you in public. I would so hang out with her in a corner at a social gathering, just saying. And here's the thing. She blends her genre, okay? And this book does so much. So it's a romantic comedy. Yes, there's longing, misunderstanding, disastrous proposals, and emotional glow-ups. See, Mr. Darcy is that rich, awkward, prideful disaster. Elizabeth Bennet, witty, observant, not here for nonsense. And their chemistry, elite. But romance is only one layer of it all. Social satire. Because Austen absolutely is roasting marriage as economical survival, class obsession, inheritance laws, fake politeness, social climbing, men with money and audacity. See, characters like Mr. Collins aren't random comedic relief. He's satire in human form. He represents performative respectability, socially proper, and spiritually unbearable. And it's also a coming of age read, okay? Because Elizabeth's journey isn't just about finding a man. It's about recognizing her own blind spots. See, this is where she's learning that wit can become prejudice, first impressions can fail, pride isn't exclusive to Darcy. And basically, she reads Darcy, then realizes that, hey, she also needs to read herself. And the big one, it's a novel of manners. So what is a novel of manners? See, a novel of manners explores how society operates through etiquette, status, reputation, conversation, corset, social rules so strict that they might as well have been combat law. In Austen's world, manners are currency. Who visits first? Who dances twice? Who speaks too boldly? Who marries beneath themselves? Who embarrasses the family in public? These aren't tiny details. These are the things that determine your future. Because in Austen's England, social etiquette was the equivalent of power. A badly timed comment could ruin a marriage prospect. See Jane and Bingley. A vulgar mother could tank your whole family's reputation. Mrs. Bennet. A younger sister eloping recklessly, potential social extinction event. Thanks, Lydia. Every interaction is strategy, right? Think of each scene like the ballroom is the equivalent to a battlefield, dinner party is a negotiation table, proposal, that's your merger deal, and tea is surveillance. And so Austen weaponized etiquette. She understood that, quote, good manners often mask manipulation, classism, desperation, and hypocrisy. For example, using manners such as intimidation, self promotion, and selectively. So that was enough to function, but not enough to surrender the mind, right? And that's what makes her revolutionary. She knows the rules, she's just refusing to worship them. So we talked about the other battlefields, but let's talk about the dances, the balls. Because the thing about balls in Pride and Prejudice is that they were important. But why? And it wasn't casual. Because a dance in Pride and Prejudice signaled interest, respectability, status, public visibility. So picture a man who is unmarried, who brings in £10,000 a year, and he is initially refusing to dance. That's not shyness. That's social insult. That's a slap to the face of everybody in the room, especially when there's not enough partners for all the women to be able to dance. And here's the thing. Later, when that same man is involving himself, that shift is huge and means everything. And this is where Austen turns choreography into character development. Now, the real genius is yet to come because Austen made domestic life feel like high stakes. Because for women, it truly was. It wasn't romance. Marriage wasn't romance. Love was romance. Marriage was not. It was financial security, social mobility, family protection, personal risk. And yes, Austen is writing drawing rooms, but those drawing rooms are arenas. Because, we have said it more times than I can probably count. Pride and Prejudice is not just a love story. It's about how society performs itself, how women navigate power without having formal power, and how one sharp-eyed woman learned to separate genuine character from polished performance. So in modern terms, imagine if every text, party, invite, social media comment, and situationship had direct consequences for your housing, income, and social survival. That was Austen's world. And she wrote it like satire with her lace gloves on. All right, so let's look at some of the big literary themes. Essentially, why Pride and Prejudice is still hitting 213 years later. Okay? Anyways, first impressions and misjudgment. You thought you knew, but did you? And this is where Austen's masterclass and how badly people read each other can go, especially when ego, social pressure, and personal bias are involved. See, at the heart of this novel is a chain reaction of misjudgment. Essentially, Elizabeth misreading Darcy, Darcy misreading Elizabeth, and the entire community misreading Wickham, which I can't wait to go through, I'm going to be very honest. Now, Austen's point was that charm is not character, reserve is not cruelty, and that first impressions are often just incomplete data. See, Elizabeth was priding herself on being perceptive, but Austen is deliberately humbling her. See, she is intelligent, but intelligence does not make someone immune to bias. And why does this matter? Because Austen is exploring how pride, overconfidence in one's judgment, and prejudice, preconceived opinion, distorts reality. Elizabeth's error is especially powerful because she believes she is above superficiality, while actively being deceived by it. And that leads us to the deeper literary question. How often do we interpret people not as they are, but through the lens of our wounded ego, social assumptions, or desire to be right? Right? And I can tell you, it's even the best of us do this. But this is why Austen's original title, First Impressions, was truly brilliant. But she sharpened it when she chose Pride and Prejudice. It doesn't just describe a mistake, it diagnoses the cause. And its modern modern relevance, right? Because this theme is still landing today. Because social media, dating culture, and public image all thrive on snap judgments. Austen is basically saying your assumptions might be the red flag. And she's not wrong. So, marriage as survival. Well, love story, absolutely. Economic strategy, unfortunately, yes. So, one of her sharpest critiques is that marriage in Regency England was often less about romance and more about female survival. Now, remember we talked about the entailment laws, right? So like those inheritance laws that meant daughters could not inherit their family home, i.e., their financial futures depended heavily on marrying well. How does this translate? Well, no husband, no equals potential poverty. Bad husband, you're going to be having social disaster. A good husband, that means you had security, status, and stability. So this transforms marriage from personal choice and romance into economic necessity. So there were some types of marriages on the spectrum. You had the ideal romantic partner. So there was mutual affection, kindness, and emotional compatibility. But even this relationship is vulnerable to class and interference. Think Jane Bennet and Bingley. Now there was another, I'm trying to put productive and practical, but it was the practical survival mode, right? This meant choosing security over passion, not because one was heartless, but because one knew the stakes, right? And that, think Charlotte Lucas and Mr. Collins. See, Charlotte was 27. She had limited prospects, and she understood that society was brutal, okay? Now, why did Charlotte matter? Because she really is one of Austen's most realistic characters. Charlotte exposes a painful truth. Women often had to prioritize stability over desire. She isn't settling because she lacks imagination. She's adapting because society gave her limited options and she had to do what she could. Now that leads us to the reckless chaos model. If you don't already know who this is, I push you to read the book, watch the movies, you'll understand. Because this marriage was built on impulse. It was built on vanity and it was built on lust. See, Austen shows that romance without judgment can become ruinous. Think Lydia Bennet and Wickham. But anything involving Wickham is, ruinous, in my opinion. Then you have the evolved ideal. This wasn't just attraction. This was growth, humility, mutual respect, and emotional intelligence. Think Elizabeth and Darcy. Their marriage worked because both characters changed, because they wanted to be better, because they saw everything that was going on, and they knew that they wouldn't get very far or be happy if they didn't. And that was probably one of the biggest points, if you really think about it, that people were going to look at and say, what? Because Elizabeth wasn't settling. They all thought Darcy was, but in all honesty, Darcy wasn't settling either. Darcy essentially said, you know what, I like her. I'm picking her. And that in itself was scandal enough. Now let's look at Austen's critique with this. She's not anti-marriage. She is anti-marriage without self-awareness, respect, or choice. Because in Austen's world, marriage revealed the intersection of gender equality, financial systems, social mobility, and personal values. Basically, romance, but with the legal consequences. Then we have class, status, and social performance. Who has money, who has manners, and who gets to decide what respectable means. Austen's society is obsessed with hierarchy. In Pride and Prejudice, class is not just about the wealth you had. It was about land ownership, family connections, manners, speech, reputation. See, let's explore Darcy's pride. Darcy's arrogance is partly personal, but Austen makes it clear that it's also structural. He had been raised to believe status mattered. His behavior reflected aristocratic conditioning. See, Elizabeth Prejudice is, her social embarrassment. Look at her mother's antics, Lydia's recklessness, Mr. Collins' absurdity. It makes her acutely aware of class judgment. And she's resisting being made to feel less than, which is why Darcy's early behavior stings so deeply. Now, Austen is going to critique the inherited wealth because money often created entitlement rather than wisdom. There was snobbery, where characters like Miss Bingley and Lady Catherine treated class as moral superiority, and performative gentility. Politeness is often social theater, not genuine virtue. Okay? And this is where we talk about where the class, status, performance, all that comes into play. Because there comes Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Ugh, the aristocratic audacity in human form. She is truly a representation of the absurdity of inherited power. She assumes rank gives her authority over people's lives. It doesn't matter who, their choices and their marriages, okay? And she is not someone who anyone goes against. Essentially, Lady Catherine says jump, you say how high, okay? Watch the movie, you'll understand. Now, her confrontation with Elizabeth is one of Austen's boldest moments, okay? Because Elizabeth is one without title, fortune, or status, and she's still asserting her equal humanitarian rights. And Lady Catherine is not having it, okay? This was Austen's quietly but powerful way of challenging rigid class systems. And she was suggesting that true worth comes from intelligence, integrity, and self-knowledge, not your birthright, which would honestly vex Lady Catherine de Bourgh, okay? And why does this still hit? Because Austen understood something timeless. People still judge too quickly. They confuse charisma with goodness. They navigate love through financial realities, perform status, and mistake social power for personal worth. Again, Austen wasn't just writing romance. She was dissecting society with her wit. Pride and Prejudice endures because beneath the ball gowns and proposals is a sharp question. What blinds us more, our desire to be loved or our certainty that we already understand? Austen's wit was iconic. It was also weaponized comedy. Okay? She dragged an entire society and sounded perfectly polite while doing so. Now, she did not need swords or scandals or dramatic monologues to critique this society. She was using something far sharper, okay? Irony, precision, manners so polished they cut. Austen's humor isn't just there in Pride and Prejudice to make readers laugh, okay? It's a little literary scalpel. She's slicing into vanity, class obsession, performative morality, and marriage market madness. And she's doing it all while sounding like the most respectable woman in the room. Right? And the opening line that is iconic, okay, is satire in a ball gown. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. This may be one of the most famous opening lines in English literature, and for good reason. Now, at first glance, you're going, it sounds wise, formal, authoritative, like society itself has spoken. But Austen was absolutely joking. Okay, what she really was saying was, society is so obsessed with money and marriage that the moment a wealthy bachelor exists, everyone immediately treats him like a public resource. He isn't a person; he's a walking inheritance. Right? And is she wrong? Let's be honest. Was she wrong? No. Because Austen's joke was that the universal truth isn't that a rich man wants a wife. It's that families with unmarried daughters desperately wanted a rich man for that daughter to marry. And that is satire disguised as social observation. And it sets the tone for the whole novel. I.e., welcome to Regency England, where matchmaking is basically competitive economics. Was she wrong? Now, her irony was also perfection. It was the art of saying one thing and meaning another, and she perfected her verbal irony, okay? The elegant literary art of politeness with a hidden knife. She presented ridiculous behavior with such calm seriousness that readers were trusted to recognize that absurdity themselves. And why was that a big deal? Because Austen didn't scream, "This is ridiculous!" She simply showed people being ridiculous and said, I'm going to let them expose themselves. And that restraint makes the comedy so much sharper. Okay. Now, one of those comedy themes would be Mrs. Bennet, her panic, matrimony, and comic chaos. See, Mrs. Bennet is one of Austen's funniest creations because she is both absurd and understandable. Now, Austen did something really brilliant with her. She makes her super, super ridiculous. So much so you just want to like cringe. But she also reveals that the system that made Mrs. Bennet anxious, okay? And the translation is she's chaotic, but patriarchy helped create that chaos. She becomes really comic relief and social critique, okay? Now, I'm going to get more into Mrs. Bennet in the next episode, but essentially you should know that on the surface she was dramatic, nosy, socially embarrassing, and completely fixated on marrying off her daughters. But beneath the surface, it was pure desperation for a real economic fear. Because entailment, remember, that's where the estate passes to a male heir, and they don't have a male heir, which means that the daughters' futures are financially precarious, i.e., they need to make a good marriage or they're going to be destitute. And that meant that they needed family and people to take care of them. Now, enter Mr. Collins a little bit later, and he's okay. If awkward formality could become a person, it would be Mr. Collins. And his superpower is turning every interaction into a performance of submission. He doesn't just respect hierarchy, he worships it. Austen uses him to mock performative humility, class groveling, empty religiousness, and social climbing disguised as virtue. Look, his first proposal, is pure comedy gold. And that's because he genuinely cannot imagine being refused. Wow. And I saw a person flash into my head. And I can't unsee that now. Anyways, I'm back. So why is this? Why can he not imagine, why can't he imagine that he'll be refused? Like, he's so great, right? Because he sees marriage less as an emotional connection and more as a practical arrangement, which is something that was common for the time. So when he's rejected, it's not a personal thing. It's not just a personal thing. It's Austen roasting a worldview. He had a good job. He had a good patroness. He had everything a woman could want. Why wouldn't he be a good marriage candidate? Now, there was truly so much social absurdity, it was nuts. And Regency England was a comedy of etiquette. See, Austen understood that society often behaved like theater. Things like balls, dinners, introductions, letters, those weren't casual events. They were battlegrounds. And every conversation was loaded with class calculation, reputation management, marriage politics, and subtle insult. So, for example, a polite sentence in Austen can mean, I wish you well, or I would rather be buried than associated with you. I do like that I would rather be buried than associated with you. I might use it. Thanks, Jane. This is what makes Austen's comedy so endearing, though. She reveals how ridiculous humans can become when social performance matters more than sincerity. Now, we're going to move on to Mr. Bennet, and he is literature's early sarcastic dad. And he may be one of fiction's earliest masters of deadpan. He survives family chaos through irony, detachment, and observational comedy. Now, here's the thing. His vibe is very much everything is observed. I'm not panicking. And he's often the function as the reader's surrogate. So he's seeing the nonsense clearly and commenting it with dry wit. But why is he funny? Because he understands social stupidity better than almost anyone. But where are the flaws? Well, because his sarcasm can become passive, right? He mocks those around him, but he's often withdrawing instead of intervening or fixing anything. And the deeper point Austen was trying to make is that intelligence without responsibility can also fail. Because even some of her funniest characters aren't safe from critique. Now, wit as moral judgment. See, Austen's humor is never random. She uses comedy to reveal character. In Austen's philosophy, true wit requires perception, false performance invites ridicule. So, in Austen's world, comedy is ethical. But why is this still hitting today? Because Austen's targets haven't disappeared. What are the modern equivalents? Status obsession on social media, performative relationships, parental pressure, clout chasers. She reminds us that while fashion changes, human absurdity doesn't. See, Austen's wit is not decorative, it's strategic. She's using humor to entertain, critique, expose, and survive. She's turned drawing rooms into battlefields and sarcasm into social revolution. She wrote social satire so sharp it still cuts 213 years later. Politeness was her camouflage, irony was her weapon. All right, so let's dive into Elizabeth Bennet because we have talked about so many, but she is truly, truly an important part of this. So she endures because she is startlingly modern, okay? She's often remembered as the sharp observer, and Austen is quietly the one who flips the script, where her greatest strength is also her greatest vulnerability. Now, what makes her timeless is not perfection, but motion. She is constantly in process. She's not the one to sit around and be played. That lyric came to my head. But anyhow, she is important because Elizabeth isn't always right. That's exactly why she's lasted so long. Because if she were flawless, she would be a moral lesson. And in a sense, she is a psychological journey. See, she does misjudge. She reevaluates. She confronts her own arrogance. And that's when Austen gives her the rare privilege of being both confident and corrigible. And here's the thing. Her conflict with Fitzwilliam Darcy is not just romance. It's misinterpretation at a grand scale. You know? And that's the thing. She believes in the beginning that people, she has people figured out, which means she's trusting her instincts, her humor, and her ability to read that person's character. And to be fair, she is actually often perceptive. But Austen makes a subtle psychological argument. Confidence and judgment can become substitute for actual understanding. And that makes sense. See, Elizabeth's biggest mistake is not ignorance, all right? It's certainty. Certainty that she is right based on what she knows, okay? Now, why is it crucial that she forms two early conclusions, where Darcy is proud, cruel, the socially superior villain, and Wickham is that wronged, charming, trustworthy storyteller? Well, because Wickham flatters her. Wickham comes to her first. Wickham makes that argument first, and he tells her stories that position himself as the victim and Darcy as the villain. And he's so easy to like socially, and portrays such an emotional accessibility, and he's so convincing. Whereas Darcy, bless his heart, by contrast, he's insulted her pride already. The man's awkward, restrained, and so socially stiff he could be a fork. He doesn't perform likability. So Elizabeth is going to do what most humans are going to do when they're forced to choose. She's trusting her emotional resonance over evidence. And to be fair, there's not a lot of evidence, is there? And the evidence that is given to her is not always from a source she considers responsible or reputable, And here's the thing. It's that even the smartest person in the room can be misled, okay? And not because they lack intelligence, but that's because they trust it too completely, okay? Now, Elizabeth and her arc is so powerful because she does something very, very rare in literature. And that is she realizes the mistake she makes, she owns it, and she changes. She doesn't say, I'm going to change, and doesn't ever do it. She changes because she did know that she was wrong, and she's going to do better. All right, so Fitzwilliam Darcy, not just the brooding rich guy, okay? That version is the surface myth people remember because it's so visually iconic. But Austen does something so precise. She builds Darcy as a socially engineered personality, and then she slowly dismantles him. And here's the thing. to watch Darcy from beginning to end, you can see the dismantling she does. Okay? Because in the beginning, he's emotionally distant, he's socially awkward. I love that about him, by the way. And he's very prideful, but not in like that cartoon village way. He's prideful more like institutional confidence. Okay? And here's the thing Darcy is not someone who lacks feelings, and that's not how he was introduced. He has feelings. He just doesn't know how to manage the expressions of feeling inside of like a rigid social system. You know what I mean? He's been taught how to be, and this is what he does. Now, surface Darcy is so easy to judge because he's not trying very hard to be likable. He really doesn't care. She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me. And here's the thing. That line is scathing, and he fumbles so badly. But Austen is doing something subtle here. She's letting the reader agree that too quickly with Elizabeth's first impression. So we do label him a villain early on, and that's where we fall into the trap, okay? Now, Darcy thinks something altogether different, and his worldview is shaped by inheritance, hierarchy, and responsibility. In his mind, rank isn't just worth, it's moral structure. His behavior reflects on the family quality. His marriage is not just romance, it's social alignment. And good judgment means protecting class stability because that's what he's been told. So, he's not thinking, hey, I'm better than them. He's thinking, I've been taught to recognize instability and I'm responsible for noticing it. That's why his pride is so complicated. See, for him, it's not purely ego, which would be easy to dismiss if it was. It's trained perception. And here's the thing. He doesn't carry the belief that he is superior. Oh, not at all. He believes correct judgment does not require emotional softness. So he's going to suppress the feelings that make him human. And that's just what he's been told. And he's going to replace them with something that makes him stronger, his fortress stronger. And that makes him cold. Okay? As he's not really cold, but that's how people read him. And he's just really carefully observing people. That's all it is. Now, why does this matter? Because Darcy is basically Jane Austen asking us, what happens when intelligence, wealth, and responsibility are combined with emotional underdevelopment? And the answer is that you get someone accurate but unlikable, principled but rigid, protective but judgmental, intelligent but socially harmful without realizing. And that's why Elizabeth Bennet is so essential to his arc. Because she is the first person who does not just reject him. She corrects his entire interpretive system to all of this. Okay? She is the one who inspires the real flex. And it all boils down to becoming accurate about people in a humane way. And that's why Darcy endures as a blueprint character. He's not redeemed by just love. Not at all. He is rebuilt by it. Okay, so we talked a little bit about Elizabeth Bennet. But that tension that she gives off comes from something subtle, not radical. She's not trying to escape her world, right? She's trying to move through it without surrendering to the rules. And so she lives inside the marriage economy. She's just refusing to be shaped by it in the usual way. And this is where Austen's real pressure lives, because it was difficult to be in that world and not succumb to it, right? Now, this is the thing. Elizabeth Bennet's not trying to burn the system down. Not at all. She's doing something more precarious. She is participating in it, observing it clearly, and refusing it to let her divine her internal logic. So that's why she feels so modern. Now she's not escaping the marriage market, she's walking through it with her judgment intact. And in Austen's world, that is a form of resistance that changes everything without announcing itself as a revolution, right? But here's the thing. There were some women who just they could not do that. They did not have the means to do that, okay? And here's the thing. Focusing a little bit on Charlotte Lucas, she could have written a Regency survival guide disguised as a moral debate. Okay? Because here's the thing. Charlotte Lucas is the one we want for everything to work out. She's a good friend of Lizzie's. She's does what she's supposed to do, and our immediate reaction as the audience is like, why would you do this, Charlotte? But it's not that we think she did something wrong, is that we do think that, now in our modern day, that she's settling. But here's the thing. We have to remember that in Regency era, she didn't have a choice, did she? She didn't have a lot of opportunities, and she didn't have a lot of resources. Okay? Now, Mr. Collins is not just unromantic, alright? Because we know that. He is a whole experience, okay? And here's the thing. We have to remember, Charlotte's 27. And that detail alone in Regency England would change everything, okay? She's unmarried, without fortune, and she's rapidly declining in value by societal standards. I mean, it's harsh, but it's historically accurate in framing. Now, crucially, there was no waited out and build your career option, okay? There was no financial independent pipeline. There was no single and thriving in your 30s cultural narrative, okay? It was diminishing choices. She was getting older. And so when she accepts Mr. Collins, it's not romance logic, it's infrastructure logic, okay? Now, her internal monologue would look something like, I am not romantic, I only ask for a comfortable home. What's that translation? Well, she's trying to optimize her survival, not storytelling. She wants stability over sparks, and she understands the system she's trapped in. It's not dreamy by any stretch of the imagination, but it's coherent. Now, Charlotte was the realist, and here's where people get it wrong. Charlotte's not naive, desperate, foolish, none of those. She's not. She knew what she was doing. She's strategic and system aware and emotionally pragmatic. She understands marriage in her world is not just love, it's economic security, social legitimacy, and access to a stable household, and basic long term protection. Now, romantic love is optional then, often unreliable, frequently absent. So she's choosing what is guaranteed over what is idealized, okay? Now, Charlotte Lucas is often judged through a modern lens that assumes that why didn't she just wait for love? But in Austen world, especially in Pride and Prejudice, waiting is not neutral. Waiting is risk. Okay? Charlotte wasn't anti-romance. She was anti-insecurity, and Austen doesn't mock her for it. She just complicates her. There's so many women who would have done the same thing. And Charlotte Lucas is one of the clearest examples of how constrained women's anatomy was. Because her choice reveals something bigger, okay? The real question wasn't why did Charlotte settle? It was what kind of society makes this the smartest available option? Charlotte Lucas isn't a cautionary tale about lacking romance. She's a case study in what happens when survival gets rebranded as settling. And honestly, that framing flips everything. Because suddenly she isn't tragic. She's legible. She's choosing stability over uncertainty, security over scarcity, and structure over emotional gamble. Elizabeth Bennet, our Lizzie, sees this as a compromise. But this is where Austen quietly forces us as the readers to ask, is Elizabeth rejecting wisdom or just lucky not to need it? And that's the tension humming underneath the entire novel. Because in Pride and Prejudice, love is never just love. It's also us. It's timing, it's money, and it's risk management. Charlotte Lucas didn't fail at romance. She succeeded at strategy in a game designed against her. What kind of host would I be if I didn't at least mention the guy who should come on the warning label and never does? Okay, so let's talk about Wickham, because Wickham is a walking red flag. Okay? And he's so good at entering a room like it's a carefully staged introduction rather than him being a real person. Okay? He's all curated. There's nothing real to him. He will form himself to be what you need him to be. Okay? And here's the thing. He doesn't arrive in society. He performs arrival. He never has to say, trust me, because he is going to be the one to make you feel you already do. Okay? And that is the trapdoor opening. Now, Austen was wonderful in her creation of Wickham, because Wickham's real skill isn't lying, even though he is good at it. It's structuring perception. So he doesn't need to fabricate everything, does he? When he structures correctly, all he needs to do is edit reality enough to fill in the gaps in his favor. And especially when he's the one telling you first. And that's the thing. Because people naturally trust warmth over restraint, and he exploits a vice that feels reasonable. That's the genius and the danger of it all. And people out there now that do that anyways. And the walking red flags, oh my stars. He really is a warning about something timeless, okay? He is charisma without accountability. Because Austen's essentially asking, do we confuse pleasant to perceive with safe to trust? And the uncomfortable answer to that is that yes, constantly. That's how Wickham survives socially, as long as he does. Because people are equating charm with goodness. Reserve is getting misread as guilt, and storytelling beats evidence in real time. He's not winning because he's right. Not at all. He's winning because he's convincing in the moment. Now, let's do the Darcy contrast, okay? Because Darcy and Wickham are narrative opposites. And how? Well, Darcy is slow to trust, slow to speak, high integrity. He's an observer. Wickham is fast to speak, fast to bond, and very low accountability. So Austen is flipping your instincts. The man who feels warm may be dangerous, and the man who feels cold may be principled. And the novel quietly asks, do you judge character or performance? And let's be honest, that also makes us have to think about, are we judging a book by its cover? Because Wickham is warm, but he could be the fire that burns down your house. So, what's going on? And in modern translation, Wickham is basically, I don't usually tell people this, but Darcy ruined my life. I've never said this publicly before. People think I'm the bad guy, but what? And the comments are going to be divided. Oh, poor him. Something feels off. Why does he have a different story time? He's counting on people not paying attention. And he's not just a character. He's a prototype for persuasive misinformation dressed as personal testimony. The crazy thing is that Wickham isn't dangerous because he invents lies. He's dangerous because he tells emotionally satisfying versions of the truth. And he's going to let everyone else do the rest of the believing for him, fill in those gaps. And that's why Austen isn't just giving us a villain. She's giving us a mirror. Because Wickham's real skill isn't deception. It's making people think that they weren't deceived at all. Now let's continue with the uncomfortable truth that Jane Austen did not name this novel like a personality quiz. She named it like a diagnosis. Not who's the proud one and who's the judgmental one, but how do Pride and Prejudice circulate through everyone and quietly ruin their ability to see clearly. Because there are questions under the story. Because on the surface, the book looks simple, doesn't it? You think it's about a man and a woman, and one of them obviously is too much pride, and one is too prejudice. Not this time, because Austen isn't handing out the traits like they're stickers. She's showing how societal systems manufacture a distortion in perception. Because the thing is that your perception is based on what you know. And if you know a system is, say, routed about one thing, that's what you have to follow. As in, let's say nowadays. Nowadays, women have the ability to do everything on their own. They don't need to be married. Because at one point, you did need to be married to have a financial account, say a bank account or a job. And the questions didn't go to the woman for medical things, they went to the man. And in the time of that, and in the Regency era, it's about the same, isn't it? It was the man's decision. And now the real question is going to become, who is actually distorted? Right? And how does that distortion behave under pressure? Because, yeah, Darcy does appear proud, right? But Austen makes sure this is complicated mighty quick. Because if you think about it, his pride isn't just ego, is it? It's the way he was raised, i.e. class conditioning, and his emotional caution that he's been trained on. He's been trained by elite society to believe certain things. And it could look like arrogance, but it also could be a defensive structure that is built to protect status and emotional safety. Because he's not doing it just to protect his stats, but his family stats. Remember, he has a sister. He's got other family members. And he's got to protect himself emotionally, right? Not just that. There's a twist. Remember, he doesn't think he's better than everybody. It's thinking that his first impression is logically sound. And that's where the prejudice enters. Now remember, Elizabeth was the same way, wasn't she? She was confident that her first impression was logically sound. Okay? And here's the thing. She had limited data, didn't she? She didn't know Darcy from Wickham in the beginning. And here's the thing. She is a sharp observer. We know that. She's witty, she's perceptive, and she is skeptical of nonsense. She's also human. Remember? And Austen is quietly showing us something sharper. Her prejudice is not ignorance. It's confidence and the incomplete evidence she has. Okay? Now, she thinks she's reading people clearly because, hey, she's trusting her intuition over hierarchy. She's distrusting of performative politeness. And she's assuming emotional instinct is truth. And that all goes out the window when she meets Darcy, because he's stiff, which is arrogance. He's reserved, which is insulting. And when she meets Wickham, his charm reads as sincerity. But Austen is doing something subtle, okay? She's telling us that Elizabeth isn't wrong because she's foolish. Because she's super, super intelligent and very, very observant. She's wrong because she's human. Okay? And here's the thing. Her prejudice is emotionally intelligent, but factually premature. Now, if Darcy represents misread pride, and Elizabeth represents misdirected judgment, then Wickham is the catalyst. And why is Wickham the catalyst? Well, because he's the one getting to everybody first. He is exploiting a key social weakness. He's exploiting the fact that people trust narratives that feel emotionally coherent. See, Wickham doesn't need to lie perfectly, does he? He just needs to make Darcy look like a villain that fits his expectations. That's prejudice in action. That's not his opinion, but as a story-shaped bias. He doesn't have to lie. He can just manipulate it if he has to. And here's the thing. Austen isn't just balancing two personality traits, okay? Because that would be too easy. She's sewing a system. Pride is the thing that protects identity. Prejudice is filtering reality. And together, they reinforce each other, okay? Now, the thing is that the loop becomes, I think I'm right, to I interpret others narrowly. Moving towards my interpretation proves I was right, into I become more confident, rinse and repeat. Now, again, with the limited information they had, it's not that they were wrong. It's that they didn't have all the information, okay? And the title is not a okay, let's be clear about this. It's a warning. It's a feedback loop about perception of self. Because Austen is essentially telling us you don't have to you don't just have pride or prejudice. You use them to stabilize your view of the world, even when it's wrong. And the part that people miss is the real reversal, okay? Because the genius of this novel is that Darcy's pride collapses when he sees his misjudgment of Elizabeth. And Elizabeth's prejudice collapses when she sees her misjudgment of Darcy. But neither change is sudden enlightenment, okay? It's a slow correction under pressure of evidence. And that's why this whole thing works. It's not opposites attract, okay? It's far more, dare I say, sexier than that. It's two people dismantling the mental systems that they've created based on what they've learned as they've grown that allowed them to misread each other in the first place. Now, Austen isn't asking, well, who is proud, who is prejudiced? Not at all. She's asking, how does a smart, socially aware person still get it wrong? And what would it take to undo the mistake? Because in Pride and Prejudice, the real antagonist is the certainty without reflection. Now, we know no one is innocent in this, okay? And society has its own Pride and Prejudice, if you will. And its performance of status anxiety, reputation management, and emotional suppression is crazy. Everyone is both judging others and terrified of being judged themselves. So it's a mutual surveillance dressed up as manners, okay? Now, pride, society's pride specifically, it's the system's ego. And this is what the world values so loudly it becomes visible. Remember, we talked about marriage as a status market. Not romance first, it's economics plus reputation plus survival. And that, we know what that means. We know that means that love is optional. We know that means that stability is mandatory. And we know that a good match is a financial upgrade, not emotional compatibility, which is a sad thing. If you're going to be married to somebody, you might as well have some compatibility. So every interaction is quietly transactional. So it's going to ask, what does this person add to my family's position? Your wealth was the equivalent of moral authority. See, money didn't just buy you comfort, it bought you credibility. And in this world, being rich was respectable, poor is suspicious, and new money was tolerated but monitored. And so that's why Darcy is automatically assumed correct once his wealth is known, even when he is behaving badly. Even within polite society, and I say that with air quotes, there's a hierarchy. Titles beat merit, lineage beats personality, and inheritance beats effort. So if you're looking at someone like Darcy, he's treated as inherently above others even before he speaks. Now, a woman's value was socially computed like a score. her beauty, her manners, her connections, her dowry, and her reputation. Now, if that sounds mechanical to you, that is the point. It's mechanical. Women were evaluated like social assets and not as individuals. Remember, what did they? It's what do you bring to this marriage, right? Now let's move on to society's prejudice. See, the system's fear reflex. If pride it was what society values, prejudice what it rejects instinctively. So of course you have the improper families. And that meant that entire households were judged as single units. So one embarrassing relative could downgrade the whole family. Now, when we look at the Bennets and they're seen as chaotic and socially loud, it's not an individual critique, is it? It's a collective branding damage, which means that, i.e., if one sister is damaged goods, then the rest must be, according to this. The lower the connection, it's more of a contamination risk. So association was mattered more important than truth. And knowing the wrong people could ruin your marriage prospects, damage reputation, and close social doors permanently. So here's the thing. You could be a good person and just be in the wrong place. And this is also why Wickham's charm was working so effectively at first, because he was performing respectability fluently, wasn't he? Now, you had women without fortune, and they were social liabilities. And here's the thing, you weren't just less eligible. You were vulnerable, judged, pressured, and urgently in need of resolution, i.e. marriage. And that urgency drove nearly every parental panic in the story, didn't it? That's the thing. Because they knew that a woman needed to be married to have any kind of protection, any kind of stability. Authentic emotions were equivalent to bad manners. And that's the thing. They considered open emotion as a social risk. Heaven help me, I would not survive. I would be improper in low connections. So people were trained to hide dislike and disguise ambition and mask attraction and perform politeness instead of honesty. So sincerity was very socially suspicious, wasn't it? Because you couldn't be you at all. And if we're gonna take this into modern translation, it's gonna tell you that it's not who you are, it's what people think you are based on who they think you know. So everything is weighted, ranked, interpreted, and recalculated through gossip and observation. There is a private self that doesn't eventually get audited by society. Basically, a reputation algorithm, if you will. And that's the thing. And that's why there was so much going on. Now remember, people were paying a lot of attention to dancing, the conversation, the tea, the smiles. And it was just really that it was a lot of high stake arenas. Now, before you press play on either adoption of Pride and Prejudice, it helps to understand something crucial. You are not choosing between good and better, okay? You're choosing between two different languages of storytelling. And when I tell you that I've seen both of them enough times, I love something new about it each and every time I watch them. Not to mention, I love different aspects of them and how they bring it to life, okay? So let's look at the 1995 TV series, okay? This is the adaptation that feels like it was built with Austen's full manuscript still open on the desk. And here's the thing. I'm here for it. If I'm being very honest, it is playing quietly in the background while I'm doing this. And it prioritizes a lot of Austen's original text survives, okay? The slow burn character development, the social nuance over spectacle, the emotional restraint that slowly tightens like a corset string. Okay, the experience, it doesn't rush you anywhere. It wants you and expects you to notice everything. A glance between becomes a paragraph, a silence becomes a decision, and a ballroom becomes a battlefield of manners. The performances are iconic. Colin Firth as Darcy is controlled, he's restrained, he's famously charged under the surface. And Jennifer Ela as Elizabeth, she's intelligent, grounded, emotionally legible without overstatement. The chemistry here is not explosive, it's pressure building underground. Now, in 2005, that was more of the emotional translation. So 1995 is Austen's manuscript, 2005 is Austen's heartbeat rendered in cinema language. And it prioritizes visual storytelling over dialogue density, the emotion expressed through movement, framing, weather, light, romantic intensity, and in immediacy, compression of plot into emotional arcs. This experience doesn't ask you to observe society as much as it asks you to feel what it costs to live inside it. So wind becomes emotion, silence becomes longing, and distance becomes tension. Knightley, as Elizabeth, she's sharper, she's more impulsive, she's more emotionally reactive. And Matthew McFadden, as Darcy, is visibly vulnerable. He's internally conflicted, and he's less contained. This is seen as felt experience, not just observed behavior. And the core difference is that the 1995 version is structure plus text plus society. So you're watching etiquette as warfare, language as power, and restraint as character definition. So it feels like, how do these people survive in this system? And in 2005, it's emotion and its atmosphere, its impulse. You're watching longing before logic, chemistry before explanation, and intimacy before explanation is ever needed. It feels like, what does it feel like when two people almost understand each other for the first time? And here's the thing. Why this matters before you actually watch. Because if you expect the same emotional delivery from both, you're going to miss the point of each one. The 1995 version rewards attention, patience, and interpretation. 2005 rewards emotional immediacy and sensory immersion. So one is like a novel you analyze, and the other is like a memory you relive. And here's the thing. Cleanly said, simply said. 95 is Austen's page, and 2005 is Austen's pulse. And the interesting part, neither replaces the other. They're not competing adaptations. They're two different ways of asking the same question. What does love look like when society is watching? I want you to think about that. And here's the thing. I love them both. And you're going to find out what I love about each one, because we're going to be talking about them. And I think that anybody who has seen them both will understand what I'm saying. Okay, so you know that when I have those, wait, I didn't know that facts, I'm going to present them to you because I adore them. So we're going to start with the fact that Austen was never married, even though she defined romance. See, Jane Austen remains one of the most iconic romance writers of literature, and she never married. That contrast is exactly why she's fascinating, though. She wrote about love as negotiation of class, of pride, of security, attraction filtered through social constraint, and emotional intelligence before it had a name. And yet, in her own life, she observed more than she participated. That distance may be part of why her romances feel so psychologically precise rather than idealized. Because it's not fairy tale romance, it's romance under pressure. Okay? Now, there's a scene we're going to talk about in the 1995 version, that Darcy Lake scene. And that's not Austen. That's TV history. And when we talk about it and you watch it, you'll understand. It's him emerging from the lake in a soaked shirt. Its intensity dialed to 100, and it is really not from Pride and Prejudice. It was added in the 95 adaptation, which was directed by Andrew Davies. And that changed everything. And we're going to discuss that more. Because in other words, Austen wrote the psychology. Davies added the wet shirt, and pop culture never recovered. And trust me, you will enjoy it if you were a Darcy fan. Now, Austen's afterlife, from Regency England to pop culture DNA. Pride and Prejudice didn't just stay in the 19th century, okay? And you'll notice in all of its variations, because it became a creative engine for modern storytelling. Now, there are fingerprints everywhere, but some of them you might recognize might be Bridget Jones's Diary. Yeah, that's modern day Lizzie Bennet energy in chaotic millennial form. There are film and TV adaptations, and each era makes Darcy to match its ideal masculinity. And some Hallmark movies do it, and it's awesome. There are some web series adaptations, such as the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which relocates Austen into YouTube era storytelling, and romance fiction at large, so enemies to lovers, miscommunication arcs, he's rude but actually wounded tropes. Mm, 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 my type. Anyways, so why is this wild? Well, because even when writers think they're doing something new, they're just remixing Austen unconsciously. Jane Austen did not just write a novel or even a series of novels. She wrote a template. And that is absolutely true, because if you ever watch her, the way society has used it, she was super smart in how she did it. And it's lasted for hundreds of years. Now, there is a hidden academic angle. Austen invents psychological realism. Now, scholars will often argue that Austen helps shape what we call now psychological realism, which is fiction where the real drama is internal rather than external, which is really, that's how it goes most of the time. See, because in Pride and Prejudice, nothing truly big happens in a plot heavy sense. Like, there's no wars, no duels, no dramatic deaths. That's what we look for, because it's got to be something big, right? But instead, the tension lives in the misread intentions, the shifting of self awareness, and that evolving moral judgment. Because Elizabeth Bennet's biggest battlefield is her own interpretation of people, isn't it? And that's the shift Austen helped normalize in literature. The most important story is what characters realize about themselves. And that foundation influences everything from literary fiction to modern prestige TV. And it helps us to see that it is okay to shift our positions on things based on what we are learning. It is okay to think one thing even if it's wrong, but to adjust when we find out the facts, right? And it's also okay that we realize this about ourselves, because in the end, if we don't know that we are that way, we are unwilling to change. And some people are unwilling to change. But those who realize these important traits about themselves and fix it, that is the big thing right there. Okay. Now, you're going to say those are interesting, but why do they actually matter? Well, because they aren't just trivia. Okay. These reframe Austen as not just a romance writer. She is a creator of a template that has lasted hundreds of years. She is a social psychologist before psychology even existed. And she's a cultural blueprint engine for modern storytelling. So, when you think you're just watching another period romance, you're really just watching another origin code of modern emotional storytelling. Cups is why nearly 2 centuries later we still discuss the story. It's not because of the romance, not just the romance. And it's not just because of Darcy emerging from the lake, or the hand flex heard around the world, which we will get into. It's because Austen understood something terrifyingly modern. People rarely see each other clearly the first time. We see status, we see performance, we see reputation. We see what we expect to see. And in Pride and Prejudice, every character is navigating a world where perception has consequences. Mrs. Bennet panics because survival depends on marriage. Charlotte sacrifices romance because stability is not guaranteed. Wickham is going to weaponize charm because likability is often mistaken for goodness. Darcy hides vulnerability behind status, and Elizabeth mistakes confidence in her judgment for truth. Nobody is entirely foolish. No one is entirely innocent, and that's what makes Austen's world feel so real. Because the true conflict was never simply Elizabeth v. Darcy. It was human beings v. the stories that they tell themselves about other people. And that is the genius of Austen. She doesn't reward her characters for being clever. Oh, no, no, no. She rewards them for becoming self aware, for learning to question themselves, for surviving humiliation, for admitting they were wrong. Only then does love truly become possible. Not as a fantasy, not as destiny, but as growth earned through painful correction. And maybe that's why Pride and Prejudice still endures, because beneath the wit, the gowns, the ballroom tension, and the iconic yearning, Austen was quietly dissecting the machinery of society itself. A world where reputation is currency, where marriage is economics, where class shapes perception, and everybody performs. Austen wasn't just writing romance. She was exposing the system underneath it. So before we enter the BBC ballrooms, before we compare longing stares, dramatic rain confessions, and definitive Darcy's, we needed to understand the original battlefield Jane Austen created in the first place. And next time, we fully and finally step into 1995. The wet shirts, the glances, the social warfare disguised as polite conversation, and the adaptation that permanently altered the cultural meaning of Mr. Darcy forever. And that's why every adaptation hits differently. Because once you understand the machinery underneath the story, you stop watching it as a romance and you start watching it as a social pressure cooker. Which brings us to the most iconic interpretation of all, the BBC ballroom, the silence, the restraint, the slow burn of everything not being said. Pride and Prejudice, directed by Andrew Davies in 1995, gives us a Darcy who doesn't just exist in the story. He recalculates the entire emotional temperature of it all. And of course, there's Colin Firth, the wet shirt. It is not just a moment, it becomes cultural mythology. Because suddenly Darcy is no longer just a character. He is an idea, restraint breaking in real time. So Pride and Prejudice was never just about a proud man and a prejudiced woman. It was about how quickly we construct stories about other people, how confidently we believe them, and how painfully we have to unlearn them. And maybe that's Austen's real brilliance, though. Love doesn't begin when the right person appears. It begins when the wrong assumptions finally collapse. So I'm going to leave you with this question. Who do you think Austen judged more harshly? Not morally, but intellectually. Darcy for assuming status equals correctness, or Elizabeth for assuming perception equals truth? I look forward to hearing your answers. Until next time, Buttercups, I hope you have a wonderful week.